They forced her to marry an Earthborn as punishment. But his gentle touch changed everything. The capital of the Dorethian Empire stretched endlessly, a shimmering web of silver towers and skybridges that glowed under the light of three suns. From above, it looked like a city of dreams, but within its walls, every citizen lived under rules that were as strict as they were unforgiving. Among them, Princess Liara walked with measured steps through the palace halls, her mind racing faster than her heart. She had always known that defiance in the empire came at a cost, but never had she imagined the price would be this high. Liara's punishment had been decided by the Council of Elders, the supreme rulers of her world. She had spoken out, publicly questioning laws that oppressed the weaker citizens, advocating for fairness where most saw only tradition. To the council, she was reckless, a danger to their carefully maintained order. To Liara, she had done what any person with a conscience should. And now, as the echo of the council's decree rang in her ears, she realized she had been stripped of all her freedom in the most humiliating way imaginable. They had chosen her husband for her, an Earthborn. The council's words had lingered in her mind with a bitter sting. Humans were considered primitive, unworthy, and fragile, hardly capable of understanding the complexities of the Empire's society. To force a princess of Darethia to marry one was a punishment meant to shame her, to teach her obedience. The words, "He is gentle and simple," had been used by the elders, as if that explained the entire reasoning behind the cruel arrangement. Liara's pride bristled at the thought. She had never imagined a human could hold any authority in the Empire, let alone stand beside her as her husband. And yet, as the time of her first meeting drew near, curiosity gnawed at her. She wondered how weak or awkward he truly was, whether he would tremble or cower at her presence, and what she herself might feel in the face of such a humiliation. When the hour finally came, she was escorted to a private garden high above the palace. The air was filled with the scent of alien blossoms, colors she had known all her life but never truly seen with attention. There, standing beneath a silver-leafed tree, was Evan. His posture was unassuming, yet his presence was calm and steady. Unlike the towering nobles of Darethia, he was of average height, with a frame that seemed delicate, yet something about him suggested quiet resilience. His brown eyes met hers without fear, without judgment. Liara stepped closer, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "You are Evan?" she asked, her voice sharp with authority. "Yes," he replied simply, his voice calm. "I've been told I am to be your husband." Liara's lips tightened. "You've been told," she raised an eyebrow. "And yet you came willingly?" Evan's lips curved into a faint smile. "I didn't see the point in resistance. I am here and this is our situation. I believe we will manage in time." Liara blinked. He didn't stammer, he didn't look afraid, he simply accepted it. That in itself was unusual, shocking even. The council had spoken of humans as fragile creatures, but here was one who looked composed, perhaps even confident. "Do you even understand what this marriage means?" she asked, her voice dropping into a low, warning tone. "Do you understand who I am?" Evan's gaze didn't waver. "I know you are a princess of Darethia, and I know the council considers me unworthy. That is enough for now. I hope we can learn more about each other as we go." Liara felt a strange shift in her chest. She had expected arrogance or terror or even ignorance, not calmness. Not reason, not a gentleness that somehow seemed stronger than the armored guards stationed nearby. She turned away abruptly, needing to hide the confusion that gnawed at her. The first days of their union were filled with tension. Liara moved through her duties with her usual precision, treating Evan as a polite guest rather than a partner. She expected him to stumble, to fail at the smallest of things, to remind her constantly of the folly of the council's decision. Instead, he observed quietly, asking questions when needed, helping when asked, never imposing but always present. When she first insisted on teaching him about Darethian customs, it became immediately clear that Evan was not easily intimidated. He learned the complex hand gestures and bowing sequences quickly, often managing them with a small, self-deprecating smile that made Liara want to roll her eyes and laugh at the same time. "You have a strange way of moving your fingers," she remarked during one session, exasperation in her tone. "I've always believed a smile can replace 100 gestures," he said softly, "but if you prefer precision, I can continue trying." It was that gentle humor, that lack of defensiveness, that made Liara pause. For the first time since her punishment began, she felt a flicker of something she had not allowed herself to feel in months. Curiosity without anger, fascination without contempt. One evening, as they walked through the palace's hanging gardens, Evan pointed out a cluster of flowers that glowed faintly under the light of the moons. "These remind me of Earth bioluminescent plants," he said. "We have nothing exactly like this, but I like to imagine something similar exists there." Liara looked at him, expecting a trivial comment, but was met with quiet sincerity. "And why do you imagine that?" she asked, her tone softer than she intended. "Because even in the strangest places, I like to think there is beauty similar to what I know," he replied. Liara was silent. No one had ever spoken to her with such simplicity, yet such thoughtfulness. In that moment, the walls she had built around herself began to feel less like protection and more like prison. Still, she could not forget the reason for this marriage. Each day reminded her that the council's punishment had stripped her of choice. She could not yet trust Evan fully. She could not yet allow herself to imagine a future where she wanted to stay by his side rather than merely endure his presence. The palace itself, though glittering and grand, became a stage for small tests. Guards who were loyal to the council watched them constantly, waiting for any sign of weakness in the Earthborn. Liara noticed how Evan handled these observations, not with fear, not with defiance, but with quiet composure. He learned the names of the palace staff, helped in small ways that no one expected, and never allowed pride to dictate his actions. It was during a minor crisis that Liara saw his value most clearly. A small accident in the palace kitchens caused a fire to break out. Panic spread among the staff, but Evan remained calm. He organized a line of workers, used human methods that were unorthodox to the Dorethians, and helped put out the flames before the palace fire suppression systems were fully engaged. Liara watched from the balcony above, her heart pounding, not from fear but from something else entirely. She had expected him to fail to confirm her prejudices. Instead, he had succeeded with skill, courage, and calmness. For the first time, she felt admiration, and with it, the faintest stirrings of respect. Yet even in these moments, she fought herself. She could not allow a human, no matter how capable, to make her forget her anger at the council's punishment. She could not allow herself to feel warmth toward the man who had been forced upon her. And yet, as the days passed, small gestures began to accumulate. Evan remembered the way she liked her tea, quietly repaired a broken device she had dismissed as unsolvable, and never demanded attention or recognition. It was strange to her, almost unsettling, that his presence brought calm rather than irritation. In the quiet of her private chambers, she found herself thinking of him in ways she refused to admit. A smile crossed her lips at a small joke he had made. Her thoughts lingered on him longer than they should have, and the anger she carried toward the council began to shift, no longer focused solely on punishment, but also on admiration for someone who did not deserve it. One night when the moons were high and the city below shimmered like a sea of stars, Evan approached her balcony. "I thought you might like to see the city from here," he said softly. Liara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It is beautiful." "They have always said humans cannot appreciate the complexities of this world," Evan said quietly, looking out at the towers. "I think it is because they never take the time to look." Liara turned to him, her eyes reflecting the light of the moons. For the first time, she saw not the punishment, not the humiliation, but the person beside her. He was patient, kind, and remarkably human in ways that she had underestimated. And though she would not admit it aloud, a part of her felt that perhaps this marriage, forced upon her as punishment, might also be the beginning of something she could never have expected. The city hummed below, the three suns now replaced by soft moonlight, as the princess and the Earthborn stood together, silently acknowledging the fragile beginnings of trust, curiosity, and something more, a bond that could not be dictated by counsel or tradition. And in that quiet moment, Princess Liara understood that this story, her punishment, had only just begun. The morning sun rose over the empire's capital, casting long shadows across the silver towers. Princess Liara awoke in her chamber, the events of the previous night lingering in her mind. She could not deny the strange feeling she had experienced while standing beside Evan, the Earthborn. There was something steady, something unshakable about him, and it both frustrated and fascinated her. She had thought she would spend her days resenting him, keeping him at a distance, yet she found herself thinking about his calm voice, his quiet confidence, and the way he had handled the fire in the palace with skill that even the Darethian guards lacked. The first breakfast of the day brought a familiar tension. Liara entered the dining hall, expecting the stiff decorum and silent stares of the court. Evan was already there, seated politely, waiting. When he noticed her, he stood and offered a small, respectful bow. "Good morning, Princess," he said. Liara returned a curt nod. "Good morning. Are you prepared for your lessons today?" "I am," he replied simply, and she could not help but notice the sincerity in his tone. There was no pretension, no attempt to impress, just the quiet acceptance of responsibility. The lessons began with etiquette, a subject that Liara found tedious but necessary. She explained the complex hierarchy of the court, the gestures, the honorifics, and the careful attention to appearances. Evan listened intently, absorbing every detail. He practiced the movements with a concentration that made even the most skilled attendants pause in admiration. "You have a natural grace," Liara remarked, though her voice held a trace of disbelief. "Most humans would stumble within the first hour." Evan smiled faintly. "Perhaps I have never been taught to move like your people, but I try to learn. I respect this world enough to follow its rules." Liara found herself softened by his words. Respect was not something her people often showed to outsiders, yet Evan gave it freely without expectation or fear. It was a small thing, but it made her heart question the prejudices she had long held. As the day progressed, they moved to other lessons: history, diplomacy, and the study of alien technology. Liara had assumed that humans could not grasp the complexities of Darethian science, but Evan surprised her again. He asked intelligent questions, demonstrated logical reasoning, and even suggested improvements in areas she had thought were beyond human understanding. The council had been wrong, she realized. This man was not weak. He was not inferior. And as much as she tried to resist the acknowledgement, she felt the tiniest spark of admiration. Later, in the quiet of the afternoon, Liara took a walk through the palace gardens, accompanied by Evan. The gardens were a marvel, a mixture of alien flora that glowed softly under the twin moons' light. Liara had walked these paths countless times, but with Evan beside her, she noticed details she had never appreciated: the delicate shimmer of petals, the gentle rustle of leaves, the subtle harmony of the garden's design. "You see things differently," she said after a moment, her voice softer than intended. Evan looked at her, curiosity in his eyes. "I notice what is beautiful. Often I find people overlook simple beauty when they focus only on power or status." Liara frowned slightly, uncertain how to respond. She had grown up in a world obsessed with control, where beauty was secondary to order. Yet here was a human, an Earthborn, who valued something so simple and essential. It made her question the priorities of her own people. Their walk was interrupted by a commotion near the central courtyard. A group of palace guards ran past, shouting orders. Liara and Evan exchanged glances and moved toward the source of the disturbance. A malfunction in the palace's energy core had caused a surge, threatening to disrupt the entire district. The Darethian engineers were skilled, but the problem required a different approach, one that combined logic with creativity rather than sheer force. Evan stepped forward without hesitation. "Allow me," he said, assessing the machinery. Liara watched as he worked, applying principles she had never considered. His understanding of energy flow, his patience in adjusting the controls, and his ability to remain calm under pressure were remarkable. Within minutes, the surge was stabilized and the danger passed. The engineers looked at him with surprise and quiet respect, and even Liara felt a sense of awe. She had expected incompetence, weakness, or at least confusion. Instead, Evan had handled the crisis with skill, courage, and a clarity that reminded her that strength came in many forms. That evening, as they sat together in the palace balcony overlooking the city, Liara found herself speaking more freely than she had in months. "You are different from what I expected," she said quietly. "I thought humans were fragile, afraid, unable to survive in our world, yet you have proven otherwise time and again." Evan smiled, not boastfully, but with quiet honesty. "I may not understand everything about your world, but I try to learn. I do what I can. Strength is not just about power. It is about patience, understanding, and action when it is needed." Liara considered his words, feeling a shift within herself. For so long, she had relied on the traditions and rules of her society to define strength and worth. Now, she realized that perhaps she had been blind to other forms of power, the kind that came from heart, intellect, and character. As the nights passed, their bond grew slowly but steadily. Liara began to notice Evan's small gestures, the way he remembered her preferences, the care he took in his work, the thoughtfulness behind every action. He never demanded her attention, yet he earned it effortlessly. The palace staff began to notice the change as well. Initially skeptical and dismissive, they could not ignore the respect Evan commanded through competence and humility. Whispers spread through the corridors, questioning whether perhaps the council's judgment had been flawed. One afternoon, Liara decided to test Evan further. She presented him with a complex diplomatic scenario, one that required navigating political tension between rival factions. Most Darethians would have relied on intimidation or rigid protocol to manage the situation. Evan, however, approached it differently. He listened carefully to each party, asked thoughtful questions, and proposed solutions that balanced fairness with practical outcomes. His approach was unconventional, yet effective. Liara watched, fascinated, as the council members involved nodded in reluctant approval. "You think differently," she said later, walking beside him through the palace corridors. "I try to," he replied simply. Sometimes, seeing things from another perspective helps find solutions others cannot imagine. Liara could not deny the truth in his words. It was humbling, and yet it stirred something unfamiliar in her, a sense of hope, a realization that this human, forced upon her as punishment, could teach her as much as she might have once thought to teach him. Even as respect grew, there were moments of tension. Liara's pride and the council's influence remained strong forces. She struggled with conflicting emotions, anger at her circumstances, admiration for Evan, and curiosity about what their future might hold. There were days when she retreated into her chambers, refusing to acknowledge the small warmth growing in her chest. There were days when she found herself laughing at Evan's quiet humor, surprised by how easily his presence could lift her mood. It was during one such evening that a minor scandal erupted in the court. A high-ranking noble attempted to insult Evan openly, mocking his human origins and questioning his intelligence. The hall fell silent, waiting for the princess to react. Liara's instincts screamed to defend her status, to reject the human entirely. Yet when she looked at Evan, she saw only calmness, dignity, and integrity. Without thinking, she spoke. "Evan has proven his worth more than many of you here. If you cannot recognize it, that is your failing, not his." A hush fell over the hall. Whispers began as the noble flushed with embarrassment, realizing that the princess, despite her youth, had taken a firm stand. Evan did not react with arrogance or defiance. He simply nodded in acknowledgement of her words, a small, respectful gesture that deepened the respect of all who witnessed it. That night, Liara could not sleep. She wandered the palace gardens alone, thinking about the events of the day. The mixture of pride, fear, and admiration swirled within her. She had been forced into this marriage as punishment, yet she found herself questioning everything she had believed about humans, strength, and even herself. When Evan found her hours later, he did not speak immediately. He simply walked beside her, sharing the quiet serenity of the gardens. Finally, he spoke. "You have doubts," he said softly. Liara started slightly, then nodded. "I have doubts about many things, about my people, my world, even myself, but not about you. You have proven more in these few days than I expected in a lifetime." Evan's eyes reflected the soft glow of the bioluminescent plants. "I am not here to replace your people or your world. I am here to walk beside you. That is all I can offer, and perhaps it is enough." Liara felt a warmth she could not name. It was not love, not yet. But it was something equally powerful. The recognition that she could trust him, that he could be relied upon not only for skill and courage, but for honesty, kindness, and integrity. The days continued in this rhythm, each filled with small lessons, minor crises, and moments of quiet discovery. Liara began to see the world through Evan's eyes, noticing simplicity, beauty, and hope where she had once seen only rules, structure, and control. And with each passing day, the walls around her heart grew thinner, allowing space for something new, something unexpected, something human. The council had intended punishment. They had intended humiliation. But the gentle touch of a human, combined with courage, intellect, and patience, was slowly transforming the princess in ways they could never have foreseen. And though Liara refused to admit it aloud, she began to wonder if perhaps this punishment was not the end of her story, but the beginning of something far greater. The Darethian Empire had always been a place of order, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Rumors of discontent had begun to spread among the nobles, fueled by whispers of a princess who dared to speak against tradition. Liara sensed the subtle shifts in the palace. Lowered voices when she and Evan passed, cautious glances from the council, and the barely restrained resentment of those who saw the Earthborn as unworthy of even a single glance. Liara had learned to navigate the complexities of her world, but even she was unprepared for the wave of hostility that began to rise. It started with small things: a guard who refused to follow Evan's instructions, a message deliberately delayed, a subtle insult in the hall. She noticed and she grew tense, but Evan remained calm. He observed, learned, and adapted without anger or fear. "You have to be careful," she warned him one morning as they walked through the palace corridors. "Not everyone will accept you. Some will try to undermine you at the first opportunity." Evan nodded. "I expected as much. Humans survive by observing, learning, and adapting. I will do the same here." Liara was surprised by the simplicity of his approach. It lacked arrogance, yet it carried confidence. His calm acceptance of danger without fear or resentment was unlike anything she had encountered in the Empire before. One afternoon, the tension escalated into open confrontation. A high-ranking noble, offended by Evan's growing influence, challenged him publicly during a council meeting. The noble's words were sharp, meant to belittle and provoke. "You are not one of us," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Your people are weak, and yet you pretend to understand our ways. Tell me, Earthborn, what makes you think you can stand beside a princess of Darethia?" The hall fell silent, waiting for Evan's response. Liara's instincts screamed to intervene, to protect him with force or fury. But she watched, curious and cautious, as Evan remained composed. He did not flinch, nor did he allow anger to creep into his voice. "I do not pretend," he said softly. "I observe, I learn, and I act with care. Strength is not measured by birth or title, but by understanding and the courage to act when necessary. I may be human, but I will always stand by what is right and what is required." There was a moment of stunned silence. The noble's lips tightened in frustration, and even the council members exchanged uneasy glances. Liara felt a flicker of pride. Evan's words had cut through centuries of prejudice without threat or violence, simply by the force of reason and integrity. But this confrontation was only the beginning. That evening, Liara discovered that more serious threats were brewing. A faction within the palace sought to remove Evan entirely, believing that his presence threatened the Empire's hierarchy and her position. They planned subtle sabotage, from tampering with his daily routines to orchestrating public humiliation. The palace, once familiar and controlled, had become a labyrinth of hidden dangers. Liara shared her concerns with Evan privately. "There are those who wish to harm you, to discredit you. You must be careful. They see you as a threat simply because you are different." Evan's gaze was steady. "I expected opposition. I will be careful, but I will not allow fear to control my actions. If danger comes, we will face it together." Liara felt her chest tighten at his words. "Together," she repeated softly, realizing that the word carried a weight she had not yet allowed herself to acknowledge. The first real test came unexpectedly. A minor saboteur had tampered with the palace's transport system, causing a hover platform to falter as Evan and Liara were returning from a diplomatic meeting. The platform shook violently, threatening to throw them into the void below. Panic surged among the attendants, but Evan remained calm. "Hold my hand," he instructed, steadying Liara as he assessed the situation. "Trust me." With careful precision, he adjusted the controls, using techniques that were not standard for Darethian technology but surprisingly effective. The platform stabilized, and the immediate danger passed. Liara's heart raced, not from fear alone, but from the realization that Evan's humanity had just saved them. "You were incredible," she said later, still catching her breath. "I don't know how you did that," he shrugged modestly. "I used what I know." Sometimes solutions come from seeing things differently. It was in moments like these that Liara's respect for him deepened. She had once thought him weak, unworthy, incapable. Now she saw a different kind of strength, one rooted in intelligence, calmness, and unwavering integrity. As the days passed, the threats within the palace became more coordinated. Messages were intercepted, orders were ignored, and subtle traps were laid to test both Liara and Evan. Yet each time they faced the danger together, Evan's approach was never reckless. He observed, analyzed, and acted with precision, often turning situations to their advantage through clever solutions rather than brute force. Liara began to notice another change within herself. Her anger at being forced into this marriage, her resentment at the council's punishment, began to shift. It did not disappear, but it softened under the influence of Evan's patience and integrity. She realized that admiration and trust could grow even in the most unlikely circumstances. One evening, after a particularly challenging day filled with political maneuvering and subtle threats, Liara and Evan walked through the palace gardens. The twin moons cast silver light over the glowing flora, and the air was cool and fragrant. Liara's mind was still racing, thinking about the day's events and the dangers that still lurked. "You are remarkable," she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. "I expected weakness, and yet you face challenges I would have thought impossible." Evan looked at her, his expression calm. "I do not face them alone, I face them with you. That makes all the difference." Liara paused, considering his words. "Do you understand what it means for me to trust you, to rely on you in a world where betrayal is constant?" "I do," he replied simply. "Trust is earned through action, through honesty, through the courage to stand together. I hope I have earned some of it." Liara's lips curved into a faint smile. She realized that, against her expectations, she had begun to rely on him, not only for survival but for understanding, for guidance, for companionship. And though she would not admit it aloud, she began to feel the stirrings of something deeper, an emotional connection that went beyond duty or necessity. Their growing bond did not go unnoticed. Some of the palace staff began to admire Evan's quiet strength, seeing in him qualities that many Dorethians lacked: patience, humility, and ingenuity. Even nobles who had once sneered at him began to reconsider, at least privately, the Earthborn's value. The shift was subtle but significant, and it filled Liara with a mixture of pride and surprise. However, not all were convinced. The faction seeking to remove Evan intensified their efforts. They orchestrated a plan to publicly embarrass him during a council assembly, hoping to undermine Liara as well. The tension was palpable as the day approached, and Liara felt a familiar mix of fear and resolve. She could not allow this to succeed. When the moment came, the council chamber was filled with whispers and anticipation. A noble stepped forward, intending to expose Evan's supposed ignorance with a series of questions designed to trap him. Liara watched as Evan listened carefully, his calm demeanor unshaken. Instead of faltering, Evan responded with clarity and insight, answering each question with intelligence and precision. His explanations were logical, concise, and delivered with a quiet confidence that left the chamber stunned. Even those who opposed him could not find fault. Liara felt a surge of admiration. The human they had sought to humiliate had turned the situation to their advantage through composure, intelligence, and integrity. She realized that Evan's strength was not measured by brute force or tradition, but by his ability to remain true to himself, to act with reason and heart, even in the face of danger. After the assembly, Liara and Evan walked through the palace corridors, both tired but unbowed. "You were incredible," she said softly. "I had no idea a human could stand against so much with such calmness." Evan shook his head modestly. "I am just doing what I can. I am learning, adapting, and acting when necessary. That is all anyone can do, no matter their origin." Liara's heart swelled with a mixture of respect and something she refused to name. For the first time, she felt that this marriage, forced upon her as punishment, was no longer a burden but a source of unexpected strength. Together, they had faced threats, dangers, and prejudice. Together, they had proven that courage and intelligence were not limited to titles, species, or traditions. As night fell over the empire, the palace hummed with a quiet energy. Liara stood on her balcony, gazing at the stars above, reflecting on the events of the day. She realized that the challenges they faced were far from over, but she no longer felt the same fear or resentment she had felt at the beginning of their union. With Evan beside her, she felt capable of confronting whatever came next, strengthened not only by his presence, but by the bond that had quietly formed between them. In the darkness, as the city lights shimmered below, Liara understood that this story, the story of punishment, defiance, and unexpected companionship, was evolving into something neither she nor the council could have anticipated. The human by her side had proven himself more than worthy, more than capable, and more than deserving of trust. And in that moment, Princess Liara realized that the trials ahead, though dangerous and uncertain, were no longer hers alone to face. Together, they would navigate the challenges of the Empire, confront threats from within, and perhaps, in time, change the very world around them. The Dorethian Empire, for all its grandeur, had secrets that few dared to explore. Deep within the council's chambers, whispers of rebellion had grown louder. Liara could feel the tension in the air, an invisible weight pressing down on every noble, every soldier, every citizen who had dared to question tradition. The council had grown wary of her, wary of Evan, and wary of the change their partnership represented. Liara awoke early that morning, the pale light of the moons filtering into her chambers. She felt a mix of anticipation and unease. Something in the air told her that today would bring challenges unlike any they had faced before. Evan was already awake, standing quietly by the balcony, looking out over the city. "You look thoughtful," Liara said as she entered. "I am," Evan replied softly. "I sense that today may require careful action. I am ready if you are." Liara nodded, her pulse quickening. They had faced threats before, but something about the mood of the palace suggested that the danger today would be greater, more personal, more urgent. Their morning began with reports of unrest in the outer districts. A group of dissidents had begun to gather, taking advantage of the rumors surrounding the princess and her human companion. Liara and Evan reviewed the intelligence, analyzing the information together. "You see," Evan said, pointing to a holographic map, "they are not just gathering randomly. They have a pattern, a strategy. We can anticipate their movements and respond before they act." Liara studied the map, impressed by his insight. "You can predict their actions?" she asked. "Not perfectly," he replied, "but with logic, observation, and understanding, we can reduce risk. That is all we can do in any situation." Liara felt a surge of admiration. The humans' methods were different, unconventional, yet effective. She realized that this partnership was no longer a punishment. It was a potential advantage, a way to see her world differently and more clearly than ever before. By mid-afternoon, the palace received news that a coup was in motion. A faction within the council had begun to mobilize, planning to seize control while Liara and Evan were distracted by the unrest in the districts. The stakes had risen. This was no longer about subtle sabotage or whispered insults. This was about the very survival of the Empire's leadership and their own lives. Liara turned to Evan, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "We have to act quickly. The council cannot be allowed to destabilize the Empire. We need a plan." Evan nodded, already analyzing the information. "We need to combine human strategy with Dorethian resources. If we act carefully, we can prevent the coup without unnecessary conflict." For hours, they worked together, coordinating palace guards, securing communication channels, and planning contingencies. Liara was struck by Evan's calm presence, his ability to remain focused under pressure. Where she felt fear and frustration, he provided clarity and guidance. When evening came, the first strike of the coup unfolded. Armed forces loyal to the dissident faction attempted to seize key points within the palace. Chaos erupted, alarms blaring, guards clashing with rebels. Liara's heart pounded as she and Evan moved through the palace, directing defense efforts and ensuring that civilians were kept safe. In one corridor, they encountered a group of rebels attempting to breach the command center. Liara prepared to act with her usual precision, but Evan placed a steady hand on her arm. "Wait," he said softly. "Observe first. They are not expecting negotiation. We can use that." Liara hesitated, then watched as Evan stepped forward, speaking calmly to the rebels. He offered them a choice: surrender peacefully and face justice, or risk defeat. The clarity of his words, the confidence in his tone, and the unexpected logic behind his offer caused hesitation among the attackers. Some lowered their weapons, others paused, uncertain of the humans' unusual approach. Liara followed his lead, reinforcing his instructions with authority and reason. Together, they managed to defuse the situation, turning potential violence into surrender without bloodshed. Liara felt a rush of awe and gratitude. This man, the human who had been forced upon her as punishment, had saved countless lives with calm intelligence and courage. But the battle was far from over. The leaders of the coup had retreated to the upper levels of the palace, determined to continue their attack. Liara and Evan ascended the stairways, moving with purpose. The corridors were tense, filled with the echoes of conflict, the hum of energy shields, and the occasional shout of a guard or rebel. At the palace's command chamber, they confronted the leaders of the coup. The council members who had orchestrated the rebellion sneered, confident that their experience and numbers would overpower the princess and her human companion. Liara's instincts told her to strike decisively, but she remembered Evan's teachings: calm observation, careful reasoning, and strategic action. "Enough," Liara said firmly, stepping forward. "This rebellion ends now. Lay down your arms or face consequences that will ensure the survival of the empire, not its destruction." Evan added, "Violence is not always the answer. There is a way to resolve this without unnecessary harm. You must choose wisely." The rebels hesitated, caught off guard by the unity and confidence of the two who had once been underestimated. Evan's presence, calm yet firm, and Liara's authority combined to create a force far stronger than any one of them alone. After tense moments that felt like hours, the leaders of the coup reluctantly agreed to surrender. Guards moved quickly to secure the situation, and Liara and Evan oversaw the process to ensure fairness and order. No lives were lost, and the palace remained under their control. As the last of the rebels were escorted away, Liara leaned against a balcony railing, exhausted but relieved. "I can't believe we managed this," she said softly. Evan stood beside her, his gaze calm and steady. "You managed it because you acted with intelligence, courage, and heart. I only helped guide the process. The strength was always yours, princess." Liara turned to him, her eyes reflecting both fatigue and awe. "And yet, I could not have done it without you." For a moment, neither spoke, both absorbing the weight of the day's events. The palace, once a place of rigid rules and tradition, had become a testament to their partnership. Together, they had faced danger, outsmarted rebellion, and preserved the empire without unnecessary bloodshed. That night, in the quiet of the garden, Liara allowed herself to speak freely, sharing thoughts and fears she had kept hidden even from herself. "I never expected to find trust in this marriage," she admitted. "I never expected to see the value of someone I was supposed to despise, and yet here I am, grateful for you." Evan looked at her with gentle understanding. "Gratitude is a start, princess. Trust comes with time, and perhaps something more will grow if we allow it." Liara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of relief, admiration, and a hint of something deeper. She realized that their bond had shifted from mere necessity to genuine partnership, and that this human, this Earthborn, had proven his worth in ways that tradition and prejudice could never measure. The events of the day also shifted the perception of the palace staff and nobles. Those who had doubted Evan's abilities or dismissed his humanity were now forced to recognize the strength of his character, the clarity of his mind, and the courage that had guided their actions. Respect replaced skepticism, and admiration began to replace fear. Yet even in victory, Liara knew challenges remained. The council's influence was far-reaching, and there were still those who would resist change, who would see the human as an outsider unworthy of influence or respect. The days ahead would require vigilance, intelligence, and the continued partnership that had proven so effective today. As the moons rose high above the city, casting silver light over the glowing gardens, Liara and Evan sat together in quiet reflection. The palace was safe, the rebellion quelled, and their bond stronger than ever. For the first time, Liara allowed herself to imagine a future in which she and Evan worked together not out of punishment or obligation, but by choice and mutual respect. "This is only the beginning," she said softly, almost to herself. "We have survived this day, but the Empire still watches. There will be more challenges, more threats." Evan nodded. "And we will face them together. That is the only way to create real change, to protect what is important, and to ensure the future is better than the past." Liara felt a sense of peace she had not known in months. The human who had been forced upon her as punishment had become her ally, her partner, and perhaps, in time, something even more. Their journey had begun with defiance and fear, but now it moved forward with trust, courage, and the quiet strength that only humanity could offer. As the night deepened, Liara and Evan gazed out at the city below, the lights shimmering like stars reflected on water. The palace, once a place of control and intimidation, had become a stage for their partnership, a symbol of what could be achieved when courage, intellect, and compassion came together. And though the council would continue to test them, though challenges would arise from within and without, Liara knew that with Evan by her side, they could face whatever came next. Together, they had survived the first true trial. Together, they had shown that even a human could stand as an equal in an empire that had once believed them weak. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. The princess and the Earthborn were no longer bound by punishment alone. They were bound by trust, respect, and a partnership that had already begun to change the course of the empire itself. And in that quiet, silver-lit garden, Liara allowed herself to hope, for safety, for progress, and for the possibility of something extraordinary to grow between them. The Dorethian Empire was quiet that morning, a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the previous days. The failed coup had shaken the council, leaving the remaining members wary and cautious. Liara walked through the palace halls with Evan by her side, her steps measured but confident. The palace, once a place of tension and whispered threats, now felt lighter, almost hopeful. The citizens of the empire had begun to hear of the events that had unfolded. The story of a princess and an Earthborn working together to preserve the empire spread quietly through the districts. Many were skeptical at first, but curiosity turned to admiration as they realized that neither force nor violence had been needed to overcome the threat. Instead, intelligence, compassion, and careful planning had prevailed. Liara could sense the subtle shift in the city's energy. People were beginning to believe that change, guided by reason and courage, was possible. Liara and Evan had spent the morning coordinating with the palace staff, reviewing security measures, and planning initiatives to prevent further unrest. Each step revealed the practicality of their partnership. Evan's human perspective, combined with Liara's knowledge of the empire's culture and politics, created solutions that neither could have achieved alone. It was a balance of logic and intuition, of strength and empathy, that began to reshape the way the palace operated. During a midday meeting with the remaining council members, Liara felt the weight of her position more keenly than ever. The council, still reeling from their failed coup, approached cautiously. They attempted subtle challenges, testing the limits of her authority and questioning Evan's role. Evan remained silent, his calm presence a counterbalance to their skepticism. Liara addressed the council firmly. Our people expect guidance, protection, and fairness. This palace will no longer tolerate disunity or actions that threaten the empire. Evan has proven his ability to contribute, not because he is human, but because he is capable, intelligent, and trustworthy. You will respect that. For the first time, Liara felt the council truly listen. Their eyes betrayed surprise, perhaps even a grudging respect. The strength of her voice, combined with Evan's presence, created an authority that could not be challenged easily. The seeds of change had taken root. After the meeting, Liara and Evan walked through the palace gardens, a place that had become their sanctuary amid the political turmoil. The soft glow of the alien flora and the gentle hum of the air systems made the garden feel almost alive. Liara breathed deeply, the tension of the past days slowly leaving her. You have changed this place, she said softly, her eyes reflecting the bioluminescent lights. I never imagined that a human could do what you have done, not just survive here, but help lead, help protect, and inspire. Evan looked at her with quiet humility. I did not do it alone. You guided me, trusted me, and allowed me to act. That is why we succeeded. We are partners in this, princess. Liara smiled faintly. The word partners had begun to carry new meaning for her, something beyond duty or punishment. It spoke of trust, collaboration, and perhaps even something deeper that she had not yet allowed herself to name. The next challenge came unexpectedly. Reports arrived that dissident groups, though weakened, were regrouping in distant districts. Liara and Evan knew they could not simply rely on the palace guards or conventional methods to prevent further unrest. Instead, they devised a new plan. Using intelligence, diplomacy, and human innovation to reach out to these groups, offering solutions and leadership that did not rely on fear or intimidation. Over several days, Liara and Evan traveled to key districts, meeting with leaders, listening to grievances, and offering practical support. They spoke not as rulers dictating terms, but as allies seeking understanding. Liara observed Evan's method with growing admiration. His approach was simple yet effective. Listen first, understand deeply, act decisively. In one district, they encountered a leader who had been particularly resistant. He challenged them openly, mocking the idea that a human could guide an empire. Evan responded calmly, outlining solutions to local problems with clarity and reason. Liara added her own insights, drawing on her knowledge of the culture and history of the region. By the end of the meeting, the leader had agreed to cooperate, impressed by their sincerity and practical solutions. Word of their efforts spread quickly. Citizens began to see the possibility of a new era, one where justice, intelligence, and compassion mattered more than rigid hierarchy or fear. Liara realized that their actions were not just quelling dissent, they were reshaping the very perception of leadership in the empire. As the weeks passed, Liara and Evan continued their work. They implemented educational initiatives, improved communication systems, and introduced reforms that combined human ingenuity with Darethian tradition. Slowly, the empire began to stabilize, and trust in leadership increased. Liara felt a deep satisfaction in seeing positive change take root, knowing that it was a result of collaboration and courage rather than force or fear. Amid these successes, their personal bond grew stronger. Liara found herself seeking Evan's counsel not only for matters of the empire, but for her own thoughts and feelings. She appreciated his patience, his understanding, and his quiet strength. Evan, in turn, learned more about her world, her culture, and the challenges she faced as a princess of Darethia. Together, they navigated difficulties that neither could have faced alone. One evening, as the twin moons cast silver light over the palace gardens, Liara and Evan stood side by side, looking out over the city. The streets below were calm, the citizens moving with a sense of hope and purpose. Liara felt a swell of pride, not for herself, but for what they had achieved together. "You have done more than I imagined," she said softly. "I thought this marriage was punishment, a way to humiliate me, but it has become something else entirely, something better." Evan turned to her, his brown eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Perhaps it was never about punishment. Perhaps it was about opportunity, an opportunity for both of us to grow, to learn, and to make a difference. I am grateful for it, and for you." Liara's chest tightened. The words struck a chord deep within her. She realized that what had begun as resentment had transformed into admiration, trust, and something more profound. She allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the first in many weeks that was not tempered by fear or frustration. Their moment of quiet reflection was interrupted by a messenger from the council. The remaining members had requested an audience, seeking guidance and clarity on the future of the empire. Liara and Evan entered the chamber together, not as subjects or mere participants, but as leaders whose partnership commanded attention. The council listened as Liara outlined reforms, shared observations from the districts, and highlighted the importance of intelligence, collaboration, and compassion in leadership. Evan supported her with insights drawn from his human perspective, providing examples of practical solutions that could strengthen the empire. By the end of the meeting, the council members were visibly impressed. They had anticipated challenges, confrontation, and perhaps even humiliation, yet instead found reason, clarity, and results. Respect replaced skepticism, and cooperation replaced defiance. The empire's leadership had shifted subtly but irrevocably. After the council meeting, Liara and Evan returned to the palace gardens. The air was warm, the alien flora glowing softly in the night. Liara felt a sense of completion, as if a long and difficult journey had reached a turning point. "I never imagined it would come to this," she said quietly. "The empire is still fragile and there will always be challenges, but I believe we can face them together." Evan smiled, a faint but genuine expression of warmth. "We already have faced many challenges, and we will face more, but together we are stronger than either of us alone. That is what matters." Liara turned to him, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings that had grown over the past months, trust, respect, and a quiet affection that had begun to take root. "Together," she repeated softly. The following weeks brought stability and progress. The empire began to embrace small reforms, focusing on fairness, efficiency, and collaboration. Citizens who had once feared the council's authority now saw the possibility of leadership guided by reason and compassion. Liara and Evan continued to work side by side, their partnership a model of trust and respect. In private moments, Liara allowed herself to reflect on the transformation that had occurred within her. What had begun as punishment had become growth. What had begun as resentment had become admiration, respect, and the possibility of love. Evan had taught her that strength was not measured by power alone, but by courage, integrity, and the ability to act wisely under pressure. One night, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the three sons of Dorethia set, leaving a sky filled with stars. Liara felt a sense of hope and possibility that she had never known. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if this marriage had been a choice?" she asked softly. Evan looked at her thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but I think the journey we have taken, difficult, unexpected, and challenging, has made us who we are. I would not trade it for anything." Liara smiled, a true, unguarded smile. "Nor would I." The two stood together in silence, letting the soft glow of the moons and the quiet hum of the palace settle around them. The empire was not perfect, but it was better than it had been. And in that moment, Liara realized that the greatest victories were not those of power or status, but those of trust, partnership, and the courage to act with heart and intelligence. In the weeks that followed, Liara and Evan continued to lead, their bond deepening with every challenge they faced. Citizens began to look to them not only as rulers, but as symbols of what could be achieved when courage, understanding, and humanity came together. The princess, once punished for defiance, had found a partner in an Earthborn, a man whose gentle touch, calm courage, and intelligence had changed her world. And though the path ahead would not be without obstacles, Liara knew that with Evan beside her, they could face anything. The Empire had begun a new era, one of hope, fairness, and collaboration. And for Liara and Evan, what had begun as punishment had blossomed into trust, respect, and a bond that promised to endure through whatever challenges the future might bring. As the city slept under the soft light of the moons, Liara took Evan's hand, feeling the strength and warmth of a partnership that had survived every test. Together, they looked toward the stars, toward the future, and toward the possibilities of a world transformed by courage, intelligence, and the simple, enduring power of humanity. And in that quiet moment, Princess Liara allowed herself to hope, not only for the empire, but for the love and partnership that had grown from what had once been a punishment. Together, they had changed their world, and in doing so, they had begun a story that would be remembered for generations to come.